Alrighty, we will go ahead and get started just to be mindful of everyone's time today. So thank you to everyone who is on the line so far. Let's go ahead and progress it to the next slide. So today's agenda for the webinar, we are going to do a quick introduction so that you know who is featured on today's webinar. And then we'll dive right into the meat of the content and really look at technology as part of your growth strategy. I'm really excited that we are joined by Mike Nettles today. I'll introduce him more formally in just a moment. And then a handful of folks who are on the line today submitted questions in advance. So we'll take a combination of the advanced questions and live questions as we wrap things up. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So I am your host today. My name is Sydney Kita, and I am the Senior Marketing Communications Manager at Revel Systems. Probably most of the folks who are on the call today are familiar with Revel, but in case you're not, we are an iPad-based point-of-sale and business management platform provider, and we are based in the Atlanta area. And the real spotlight for our call today is Mike Nettles, who is the Interim Chief Digital and Technology Officer at Zaxby's. We are so excited to leverage his expertise. Mike is on Revel's advisory board, and he has a lot of experience in the transformational technology leadership space, including notable roles at Papa John's and Panera Bread Company, in addition to his current role. So very excited to tap into his expertise today. And let's go ahead and progress the slide so that we can get into the meat of the content. So we'll kick things off with a quote. This one is of course courtesy of Sir Winston Churchill, has been repeated by others since then. Never let a good crisis go to waste. And it was selected by Mike today to speak to in more detail. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get things started before jumping into some prepared questions for Mike. So Mike, did you want to give this one a little more context?
Well, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but at the same time, I think everybody can really pick up the underlying resonance. You know, this last year, let's just say we hope we never repeat it again in this industry or in our lifetimes, but it's kind of the pandemic that keeps spawning other challenges for the restaurant industry. I literally was just on the phone earlier today talking to another chain who were going on and on about not being able to keep their stores open at a good clip because they've got a significant labor crunch going on. This is not news to anybody in our industry, and I use this phrase actually with them. So what are you going to do? What opportunity are you going to seize to take advantage of this fact that everyone's feeling the pain of a lack of labor? What things can you put in place around it? And it's kind of the way I'm going to look at 2020 overall, and probably 2021 as well, if we're honest and we read the tea leaves. We got a lot of crises in this industry. It is ripe opportunity for change. And those of us who can seize those opportunities and really leverage them to drive meaningful momentum inside of the organization with a lot of stuff that's been clogged up for years, if not decades, those are going to be the ones that are going to emerge from this, the victors, taking market share, and quite frankly, really being able to plumb the lines at a technological level, Sydney, for driving growth momentum for their brand. So don't waste the crisis in front of you. Crisis is an opportunity.
Well put. Thank you so much for that. We'll go ahead and progress the slide again and jump into some of the prepared questions that I have for you today. And so the first one is just, I would love to hear from you 3 critical factors to take into account when you're exploring new tech solutions for your business.
So, you know, I'll kind of speak to this from the perspective of experience. I've done this a few times with a few different brands now, and these are kind of the hard lessons learned that I hope somebody listening today, if you're embarking on this journey yourself, take advantage of my bruises, take advantage of, you know, the things that we had to figure out as we kind of stumbled through them. And I hope they help you. But, you know, Sydney, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I love this topic. I love this subject. And quite frankly, I really do hope that the listeners get something that will help them in their own efforts. The first one, and I'm probably speaking more to the technologist in the audience right now, understand your current state of technical debt. And to explain that, if you don't know the term technical debt, it literally is the same as credit card debt. You charge something for, you charge something up now that you do not have the ability to pay back right away, fully anticipating on paying it back later. our industry is littered with pilots that were pushed to scale without actually making the investments to grow them to scale. And as a result of it, you just keep kicking that can down the road. And this has resulted in a mishmash of very old legacy systems without a lot of standards, without a lot of integration in our industry. I would say in my line of work, 20% technical debt, things that you know you're going to have to go back and fix, that's probably part of the job. And that's probably somewhat acceptable, particularly if you're not a new brand who's starting off with all new stuff and you just kind of got to deal with what you've got there. But I've worked with brands where technical debt was as high as 60%. That meant for every dollar I was spending on innovation, 60 cents of that had to be spent just working around all the technical roadblocks that we had accumulated by kicking cans down the road year after year after year. I use this example a lot. Most recently, when I was at Papa John's, when I got there, we were running MapQuest as our mapping engine of choice. And anybody knows anything about the pizza business, mapping is everything. That's how you locate the customer to the store. That's how you plan your delivery routes. It's core to even how you set up your stores for franchisee versus corporate-owned trade areas. Well, MapQuest by that point was a very, very old mapping tool. So we had just mountains of technical debt that we had built around using MapQuest. I wasn't going to get a lot of functionality necessarily by moving to something more modernized like Google Maps, but we knew by taking that architectural step, we were in one fell swoop eliminating years and years and double-digit percentage points of technical debt. So that's what I mean. You sometimes have to face these things head on. And then the second piece I would say is understanding where you are and the limitations of what you've got to work with. Really make sure you understand the business strategy, the growth strategy. For many years, IT didn't really have a seat at the table, thanks to CIOs and CTOs and CDOs. You typically do now. But the reality is you must make sure that the technology enables the business growth strategy. And that means that you really need to know what that growth strategy is. Tech for many years was oriented more as a cost saving strategy. So we're going to take costs out of the solution by throwing this technology in place. That's appropriate. That's still part of how you're going to have kind of this rationalized P&L. But at the end of the day, you really do have to understand, where does the business want to grow? Is it new market development? You're moving into states and regions you've never been to before. Get out in front of that. Go partner with your chief supply chain officer or whoever runs supply chain and understand how they're planning on getting product to those particular stores. Are you talking about new store development? They actually want to take some of the cost out of building a store and make a smaller footprint. That's going to put far more emphasis on things like kitchen production technology. So the more things you start to understand about the business growth strategy, get out of your IT world and get into the operations and the strategic world, the more you can come back with a series of initiatives and strategic plans that fully align and enable that accordingly. And then obviously one of the biggest parts of growth strategy is revenue. That is one area where digital can play a huge, huge role. You can go after new customer segment acquisition, new service operating models, whether it's delivery with your own party or delivery through third parties. You can come up with a lot of different technology solutions to enable that kind of a growth strategy, but only if you truly understand what the growth objectives are of the brand as a whole. And then the third element is think like a commercial entity out of the gate. Do not think of yourself as a utility. And that's hard because a lot of IT shops have grown up as this utility, cost saving. We're going to put this thing in, whether it's a financial system or payroll system, and it's meant to reduce costs of processing. Even POS business for a long time was really built around cash control and reduce the cost, et cetera, and not so much about optimizing value. You have to think like a commercial entity. And one of the best ways you can do this, I'm fortunate that in my career, I've operated as a commercial entity. So some of this is just kind of school of hard knocks. But all of you are out there doing business with some technology provider out there. Pick up the phone, get past the sales guy and say, hey, listen, I really want to talk to your CFO. I want to talk to your head of product management. Understand the business of technology. How do they make investments? How do they spin up costs? How do they look at product development and product release? The more you understand the business aspects, the commercial aspects of technology, the better you can behave as a business stakeholder at the table with the growth strategist. So that if they're asking for something to help spur one part of the growth strategy, you can immediately start thinking of it in terms of release cycles. How do I get the investment I need for the first part? Where's the biggest bang for the buck, et cetera, et cetera. Those three things will enable you very well, I think, to be an additive part, not just a service-oriented part. That's important, but an additive part to the strategic growth strategy planning of the business.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Another question that I had for you today is how restaurants can reimagine their businesses for a digital-first customer. That's
a great question, Sydney. And the short answer is start acting and thinking like a customer, not like a restaurant operator. But let me give you a practical example of that. Almost every restaurant has some KPI or dashboard that you look at, you work on, on a weekly basis. It's how you measure your operational productivity, your efficacy, your labor standards, et cetera, et cetera. Now, and if you don't have this is a danger sign. Go grab your customer overall satisfaction surveys. And again, if you don't have that, you're already way behind on this because you're very myopic. You're only looking at the world through the lens of how to run a profitable restaurant. Once you go grab your customer OSAT grades, look at how they grade us. Are you asking them to grade us on our standards, how we want to run the business profitably? Or are you asking them to truly grade you on their standards of having a good restaurant environment, or a good restaurant example is? Let me give you the most classic example, speed of service. I can't tell you the number of chains I walk into that measure speed of service as counter time and window time. Counter time and window time is measured from the restaurant perspective. It's once I actually have you in front of me, how long did it take me to, get you your product and serve your needs, et cetera, et cetera. That's not how a guest thinks of experience time. For them, it's the moment they pull on your lot. How long does it take them to get a parking spot? How long does it take them to get through the drive-through lane to actually get to make the order, and then from the order point to actually get their food? If it's digital, it's how long from the moment that they place the order to the food actually shows up. And in many cases, there's now a third party involved in that delivery side of the equation. The quicker you start to understand that you must view things through the lens of the guest, the more you start to understand how one-dimensional a lot of our thinking is when it comes to how do we develop innovation or how do we develop new product features. We're always trying to find ways to make it better in our mind and to improve the profitability and improve the efficacy or reduce labor or something else. Again, that's a balanced scorecard. I'm not saying don't do those things, but you must be able to view your business and your offerings and your services through the lens of the customer. And I always like to say this to people internally: quit focusing so much on what works for us and ask the question, with everything you're doing, what matters for the guest? And if you get crickets, if you can't answer that question, go get the data. Go figure out how you're going to figure out what matters to the guest. What causes a guest to have a higher frequency? For a lot of people, many years, that was, well, you give them a discount, right? They came in one time, paid full price, give them a discount, they came in another time. That can matter, but over time, what really matters to that guest is something sticky, something that goes beyond just the promotional sense. It's something that's unique. There's a great author, and I talk about him often, but it's Clay Christensen. He's written a lot of books on the subject. But one of the things that I really picked up from one of his works years ago was this concept of jobs to be done theory. In the restaurant business, we do jobs for people, and we don't think about it that way, but we do. I am your after game meal. I am your quick lunch. I serve the job of a full meal catering for all your family because somebody didn't want to cook that night or what have you. When you start thinking about things through the lens of the job you do for the guest, it opens up a world of innovative opportunities because you really start to view your business and your metrics and what success looks like very, very differently. So to me, those really are how you put yourself into a digital first mindset, because digital first means sometimes your only interaction with that guest is what they're seeing on a little 4.3-inch screen that they're holding in the palm of their hand. Not all the decor package and what's going on at the front counter, which is kind of the traditional way of looking at restaurant experience.
Yeah, for sure. And as a marketer, I definitely appreciate the insights on the customer lens being critical to doing this right. It's a changing landscape, and so ultimately you have to consider the guest experience and what platforms you have to connect with the guests that you're trying to serve.
Sydney, you couldn't be more right, and you're actually a great example. And folks, if you are in a restaurant operations, take your marketers out to lunch. Find out how they're segmenting your customer base, because I'm sure, Sydney, you have segments within Revel, but find out how they're segmenting your customer base and how they view need states. Sometimes there's this word called personas, which is they've kind of sketched out the average customer that fits within each one of these buckets. Customers aren't really all that neat, particularly when you get down to hyper personalization in digital world, but understanding segmentation modeling is a huge part of understanding how to have a digital first mindset, because you realize that it's not one size fits all. We think about it that way. I got one menu, I got one store, one drive-through. Digital gives you tremendous ability to personalize the experience. So I'm glad you brought that up, Sydney.
And I love the tip on taking your marketers out to lunch. Hopefully, if there's any other revelers on the call, they'll take that to heart. So building on that, though, what are some of the biggest opportunities in digital transformation for restaurants today?
So, I could go back before the past year, but I think the past year is probably in everybody's mind. To say that this was an absolutely historical event for the industry is probably an understatement. It's left literally not just us unchanged as an industry, but it's left the customer unchanged. You are seeing already, I saw the March sales reports. We're seeing spikes that look as high as they did back in 2019 and even before that. So we're seeing some growth opportunities as dining rooms start to open back up and warmer weather comes and people want that social experience of going out again. But the reality is that while they may be flocking back to your stores, you're going to see a pendulum swing starting to happen. And we're feeling it in the labor crunch already. So people that had drive-through and had healthy digital might suddenly start seeing opportunities where customers who have become very accustomed to the digital experience, where it was digital order and then some type of a rapid no-touch kind of pickup, suddenly want to digital order and pick up, but stay inside the store. Well, we may not have been prepared for that. So you got to understand expectations that forever change. I'll also throw out for the marketers in the crowd, all the digital privacy laws that are starting to change, tricks that we may have been able to use to really try to track guests and try to get to them and retarget them and cross-market them. That's going to change dramatically. Loyalty is now the name of the game. In fact, I saw an article that said that loyalty was probably the single biggest savior for an awful lot of brands during COVID, because it allowed them to maintain that level of connection when people just were not leaving the comfort and the safety of their own communities and traveling out. It became the one way to keep the brand relevance alive and just the daily dialogue with them. So understanding that these changes have forever changed us, it's not just like it was temporary, okay, we can now get back to old business. People who do that will be the ones who do not seize this opportunity properly. I think understanding more and more you can about the nature of the changes you put in place as an integrated part of your overall operation service delivery model and on a bolt-on is going to be critical. I have seen an awful lot of people out there, brands, that in a rush to deal with COVID just started bolting on all these things left and right. And now's the time to get back and actually integrate them. Pick what works, what needs improvement, develop a product roadmap, get it up and running, and take advantage of the opportunity. The guests now demand all of this and more. The last piece I'd probably throw out that was a big opportunity here coming out of it is realizing that the entire concept of self-pickup needs a lot of work. Restaurants are not really oriented for that. I've seen some decent curbside models that came out of the COVID crisis, but those were born out of necessity, not really born out of any sense of elegance. So I would really encourage people to start taking a hard look at the guests not wanting to leave the safety and quite frankly, the perceived cleanliness of their own car. Do you realize now that a bigger chunk of your guests, to them, the front door is actually the drive-through lane, which means what are they seeing in a drive-through lane? They're probably seeing the garbage bins in the back, and their view of cleanliness are going to be based upon what they observe from your store. We've never really thought about that. Drive-throughs were a bolt-on for many, many years, but the back of the store is now the front of house. That window could be the only interaction point. That curbside could be the only interaction point. That has impact on your groundskeeping and on things that go way beyond the technology side of the equation, but they're critical to consider if you want the seamless type of pickup moment, that is going to be digitally enabled, that's going to start driving it. Right now, these are all very much a bolt-on to the business. we're really going to have to sit back and say, how do I integrate operations, customer, digital, because these service models are here to stay, and they're probably going to grow in size and quantity over time.
Definitely. COVID's given us something of a reset with a lot of the opportunities we have to consider our existing layouts and plans and engagement points for sure. So with Revel being a cloud-based platform, I have to ask the role that you think cloud tech and native solutions are playing in businesses' ability to respond to this ever-changing landscape. And I'm wondering if you could talk to how companies can leverage that kind of tech to their advantage.
That's a great question, and I wouldn't have expected anything less. I think that we talk a little bit about Revel here, but one of the reasons I was attracted to Revel early on is they were not so much just pushing, a POS on an iPad. That's doable. You've done it. There are other competitors out there that do the same thing. You basically are offering the POS as part of a cloud-based hosted platform that allows you to rapidly build other applications that hang off of that series of kind of common services. One of the big challenges for all the restaurant brands, and Panera had it, Papa John's had it, I'm sure Domino's had it at some point before they implemented their own systems, but it's always trying to add the new on top of the old. And what I really found attractive in Revel was this concept of, hey, we actually can cohabitate. We can give you some access to some legacy systems out there, speed of service timers, maybe some other kitchen equipment providers, et cetera, but we do that because we will not in any way, shape, or form allow us to denigrate the cloud operating platform. Integration is the holy grail that this industry has been missing for 20, 25, 30 years, pretty much my entire time in this career. There have been so many tries at standards and open standards, but very few players who actually embraced it. Most of the major POS players just kept adding more proprietary stuff on top of their already aging proprietary stack. So having a cloud native provider like Revel in there, you guys didn't start with that mindset. You already assumed I got to be open and I have to have a very agile API so I can quickly adapt to the different type of restaurant concepts or retail concepts that you're trying to provide. Because you didn't come in with the mindset that the POS was the center of the universe, you came in with the mindset that the platform and the integration was the center of the universe, and POS is just one of many great enabling solutions that you can hang off of that allows you to keep abstracting kind of all these other moving parts together, but still keep them working seamlessly. The other piece is the cloud side. Almost any new innovation on digital is by default cloud. You're not going to find a lot of thick client server technology inside of the stores that is the digital front end. They're all cloud enabled. Cloud to cloud level integration is so much easier. In fact, I would say it's far more nimble and less disruptive on the store operations to have this. I'll give you an example. A great digital store doesn't always feel like a digital store. It's simply, you have orders just flying into the, to the make line monitors or the kitchen monitors, and they make them and they've got to route them to the appropriate place, whether it's digital pickup or customer self-service pickup or dine in or what have you. But the reality is that if you're truly cloud enabled, I can enable new customer functionality at micro segmented levels by region, by city, by type of customer, what have you. And I never actually have to deploy boots on the ground to go into the store to make changes to things. I can do it cloud to cloud. We can try it, we can QA it, we can test it, we can simulate it. Simulation is one of the big unsung heroes, I think, of cloud to cloud integrations, because I can actually load up a bunch of sample transaction sets and just flood them at scale and look where things might break in terms of, let's go simulate 100 busy lunch hours all at once. That's incredibly difficult to do with legacy technology that's not cloud-based, but it's very easy to do with cloud-based technology. So for all of those reasons, I think you guys have a great platform. It's what attracted me to you in the first place. But I think there's just something really, really, really compelling about the speed at which I can add more digital offerings without having to necessarily go into the store to implement them by putting yet one more helper app on top of the big POS that's already bloated beyond recognition.
Yeah, certainly. It's one thing to have a lot of functionality, but it's got to be easy to use. And on that thread of adaptability, new tech can require a really heavy upfront investment sometimes You spoke to this a little bit earlier on, but I would love to talk to you a little bit more about weighing the cost and ROI in past tech investment decisions to find the right balance between innovation and return.
Yeah, Sydney, this is what is often called in the industry the dreaded double bubble problem. And now that's not some weird iOS game or pastime. The double bubble problem is basically this. You've got the as is, a lot of legacy stuff, a lot of technical debt. It's overwhelming. And yet the business, particularly during COVID, was demanding, we got to get DoorDash working, or we got to get Uber Eats working, or we need our own ordering app, or the website needs to be able to let people, reserve and come in and dine, or whatever it happened to be. And so we just started bolting more stuff on top of it. So we added technical debt to technical debt, and you end up with this really big monstrosity of current costs. Well, eventually you hopefully take the advice I'm offering here and realize I got to have a well thought out, technical design for this. So I need to go build something better. Well, you didn't plan on that secondary expense while still maintaining the expense of keeping the current system alive. And that will happen over a period of time. At many companies, it's a year or more. You got to maintain the spend on maintenance and support of the existing while trying to bring something else in. A couple ways that I would recommend that I've gotten around to this is just understanding that in the new world order, operating expense is a bigger deal than capital expense. In the old world, you were buying a lot of heavy hardware, a lot of prepackaged applications, a lot of licenses, et cetera, et cetera. You go to your CFO would be like, put a 5-year amortization cycle on that. And suddenly your $1 million investment ask became a $200,000 a year over 5 years, operations expense. That was more digestible to the brand. Well, now you may be walking in and saying, I need to spend $1 million on, these services, but it's going to be spread out and paid for by the drink. So just like I recommended you go take your favorite marketer out to lunch somewhere, go take your CFO out to lunch as well. You really need to make sure that you two align on this up front, that they understand the double bubble problem and how long it might take you to actually build the will need to be. Listen, I've run into restaurant companies, large publicly traded restaurant companies, who didn't even have the concept of an R&D budget anywhere in their budget model. They had capital planning, but no money put aside and earmarked for R&D, understanding that some portion of that might get written off, even while other portion of it ends up, creating new lasting kind of innovation. CFOs are really trained on this stuff. And I know a lot of times we don't talk the financial language. So go to them and lay out your ideas and lay out your problems and get some upfront advisement from them on how to make the investments. I had a great relationship with a couple of CFOs I've worked with in my career. And I'll never forget one of them. We were trying to make some changes to a promotional program, within the marketing realm, digital marketing. And it really was a struggle to try to come up with a financial model that made sense, even though technologically I could have done it all day, every day. So sometimes the long pole in the tent isn't implementing the technology, but actually getting through the change management and the financial management of how are you going to account for all these things. Get in there up front, be very transparent about it, and make sure that you engage all the other parts of the business as a business leader on how you're going to fund these things, because it can be a very painful experience to be out over your skis with the new while you're still trying to fund the old.
Certainly. And one other thing that I definitely wanted to touch on is in this evolving space and in the space of tech, it can actually be sometimes perhaps easy to lose the connection to the people that we're trying to service through all of this. So what are your recommendations for how restaurants can retain that personal and human touch while exploring innovative tech solutions at the same time?
Sydney, that is my favorite question to answer because I've answered it many times. But again, I've been in this business 30 years. And one of the things I have always loved about the hospitality business is the breadth and the diversity of it. I mean, fine dining is very different than casual dining, which is very different than QSR. The back of house operations are very similar for all of those. Speed, scale, product might make some differentials, but it really does boil down to we're all in the hospitality industry. So my career aspiration, my goal, the one thing I want to see before I retire and ride off into the sunset is something the hotel industry and the car rental industry and most of the travel industry and hospitality have already figured out. Start with my name. everything you do with me needs to be about my name. Saying Sydney is the sweetest name you're ever going to hear in your ears, Sydney, because it's your name. You grew up with it. It's the most intimate thing that you own is your name. You identify with it, you become a Sydney, et cetera, et cetera. We somehow lose track of that. And a lot of the rush to digital has been about trying, once again, make the mistake of turning technology into this cost-saving thing. Well, if I throw kiosks in the stores and I throw mobile ordering out, I'll remove all the cost of doing the transaction. You can, in certain cases, do that. I can show you a lot of cases where actually labor goes up. It doesn't go down, because if you do it right, mass personalization kicks in, and suddenly you need more labor in the back of house to keep up with the demand on the guest side of the equation. But start with the name. I really do have this vision, and maybe I'm going to be the one to figure it out. Maybe one of my competitors will be the one to figure out. But I'm going to pull on to a lot after digitally ordering my food. And just like it hurts, there's going to be a reader board that says Mike Park here, and somebody's going to run over to me and say, here's your order, Mike. You know, something that uses my name, that not a number, not a card token. I mean, all that is back end kind of infrastructure we can use to build and enable this, but use my name. I know one player out there that does a really good job of this. I don't mind giving them a plug, and that's our good friends with the white cup with the green label on it. But you know, they say your name, they ask for it up front. I know some other competitors who are picking up on that. Say the name. It is the most important part of the overall relationship and experience you're trying to build. And if you do that, you will build hospitality into your digital offerings better than anybody else out there. And it's starting to happen with enough frequency. Guess what? It's going to be the standard. And if you don't figure out how to do that, you'll be the one losing market share to somebody else who figures it out before you.
Yeah, for sure. I love the name element. That's definitely a great way to keep personalization in it. And Mike, at this point, I do want to make sure that we save some time for our audience questions. And we got a bunch of great ones in via the form as folks were registering for this webinar. So I'll start with a couple of those, but certainly if anyone on this call has additional questions, go ahead and enter them in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can while still observing everyone's time. So the first is, what does food service look like in 2025? Is it more of a subscription delivery, quick service, table service, or another new service offering that restaurants need to start adapting to?
So like anybody else, I wish I had a crystal ball and I could exactly plan that out. And the pat answer, and it's not a fun one because it'd take a long time to expand, is probably all the above, and many we haven't even talked about yet. I'll tell you what it is going to look like, and that is going to be probably brands that figure out this nature of, you know, personalization and mass personalization, and actually start reinventing the very brand offering they have. We're seeing some of this in the early days. Jury's still out exactly on ghost kitchens or using excess kitchen capacity to kind of develop a new offering, you know, when your kitchens maybe aren't such as busy. But I think you're actually starting to see more over specialization, and that will become the trend based upon the level of mass customization or personalization that the demand's going to drive. So let's say I'm a guest. I'll just use Zaxby's as an example. I'm a guest and I really, really only want to, you know, order ahead and do rapid pickup. Well, if there's enough of that segment over time, there's no reason you couldn't actually build a concept or a model that does not have to take place within the four walls of the current store to manage that accordingly. We already have examples of that in the industry, people building digital only models. A lot of them are in kind of early pilot stage, but many of these are reading the tea leaves of this hyper segmentation going on in the industry because of hyper personalization is starting to drive the possibility of a very different store. I mean, you know, it really, you can go through this argument financially if you want, but let's say you're a concept with $1 million AUV target. And so your growth plan for the business is based on building more $1 million AUV boxes. Well, you come up with one of these models that, okay, by itself, it, you know, is only going to be a $500,000 AUV. But if I can knock half the cost out of it, I can put these stores closer to where the customer is, and I actually can over specialize on just that one particular service model enough that I can dominate. That's where you end up with certain concepts that have only one or two products on the menu and are just blowing them out the door left and right. You can make up on quantity what you might not be able to make up on differentiation within your current business model. So if I had to read the tea leaves, you're going to see more fragmentation within probably the menu mix. We're seeing it now. I mean, you've got an explosion of burger only joints or people that really focus on just the burger. And I think that's going to continue because the guest is going to continue to be more and more particular about what their needs are. And the one size fits all model that we've grown up with is going away. It's not my menu that matters. It's how you want to order off my menu that matters.
For sure. I want to stay a little bit with the tea leaves because I really like this question. Where do you see facial and vehicle recognition tech going for QSR?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I have some experience in my past working with, camera-based kind of monitoring systems, kind of state of the art with digital recognition systems. It's been around for a while, and I've seen some really good use cases for doing, car counts and drive-offs, and somebody pulled into a parking space. Certainly license plate recognition has been around a while if you want to tie that back to loyalty programs. So, for ease of deployment, if queue management and traffic management and even parking lot in general management becomes something that you really feel is a friction point and you need to manage holistically, the tech's out there right now. It's fairly affordable, and there's no reason you couldn't take advantage of it. Facial recognition, I'll be honest with you, outside of the NSA and some of the technology that's there, I'm not necessarily sure our privacy laws aren't going to come crashing back down on us and maybe prevent some of that from really being as commercialized as what was the movie with Tom Cruise, Minority Report, might actually play that out to be, where you walk by and a billboard starts talking to you based on picking up a scan of your iris. I think that's going to be a bit too creepy for most people, and so I don't know how much you'll be able to use it. But I'll tell you, using facial recognition for smile meters, being able to tell whether or not your guests are actually being engaged with smiles, being able to even use the technology that's out there to measure, overall guest satisfaction based upon, head movements and things that are going on. I've seen some of that working, and it is really, really pretty powerful to think about how anonymized levels of observational data can be used accordingly. I think the most practical use I've probably seen, though, for facial recognition technology isn't actually for facial recognition, it's for product accuracy. Being able to look at make lines, being able to look at production lines, being able to look at items going into a bag, and actually being able to measure whether or not the right items went in the bag, the right condiments went in with it, you made your sandwich in the right order, you made your pizza with the right toppings, et cetera, et cetera. And the industry still has many, many examples of companies that are way beyond the bleeding edge of that and actually commercializing the use of digital recognition technology to aid operations. Think of it as an angel on their shoulder that just taps and said, you made that wrong, so that you can stop the problem before it becomes a guest complaint. That's powerful, and I think that's actually where you'll see most practical uses of camera-based digital recognition technology.
Sure, that's huge. That's definitely the dream, trying to get ahead of those issues before they arise. So one thing that's, I think, pretty generally known is that restaurants have historically been slow to adapt when it comes to technology. And I'm curious I'm curious, and this was an audience question, when the pandemic dissolves, do you believe restaurants will continue to invest in technology, and why or why not?
So I'll go back to my quote that we used to open this up. Those who really do understand how to seize market growth opportunities as they present themselves, they will. They already had been. I mean, there have been some real industry leaders, and there have been some real industry laggards. Truthfully, most of the work that I do is trying to help people who may have been a little bit hesitant to do it, to accelerate quickly and try to catch up to at least state of the art, and then build a strategy that they can stay on top of thereafter. That's the other piece, though, that I think we have to consider in this business. There's an old adage in the restaurant world that you're only as good as the last plate served, and sometimes that permeates all the way out to the opposite negative, which is, I'm only looking at next month's balance sheet. I'm not really looking at next year's or the next 2 years. You're working off a razor thin margin sometimes, so people are just kind of living hand to mouth. I've probably talked more of my friends out of investing in restaurant companies and buying restaurant companies because I don't think they always realize it's a constant investment cycle. It's not put in once and just let money grow out of it. Even if it's not technology, you got to pay for keeping decor fresh and marketing costs and everything else. to stay relevant in local communities' minds. So we know from statistics about 10% of the restaurants out there evaporated this year. I'm not sure that 10% of the business went away necessarily. I think they just, the large guys pretty much dominate over the smaller guys. And that cycle continues as people who don't have the wherewithal to, kind of hang in there and make the improvements. But the other piece I'll say is this is two-sided. So in the past, people who made the investment, it was kind of, I'm doing it to grow my brand. You've never in the history of at least my career had a situation where the entire buying population changed their habits in less than 2 months' time. I mean, grocery stores were suddenly running bare of food because people were cooking at home. I've seen articles saying that subscription to online cooking channels, online cooking instructional videos, and meal kitted homes and all the rest of it are at all-time highs. People suddenly fell in love with the concept of, hey, I need to be a little more self-sufficient. Many of them are going to come back to restaurants. We're already seeing that in some of the numbers, but their expectations are going to be different. The curtain between the guest and the kitchen has been forever changed. It used to be I order food and it comes out and I eat it and I'm happy and I don't really care how you made it. They now know what goes into making it. They have a different value prop they assign to the meal and probably a much higher value prop than ever before to the experience, i.e. no hassle. The really good players are going to set the bar. And I'll leave it at this, Sydney. We order from Amazon all the time. And whether you like Amazon or not, you have a pretty predictable experience. Doesn't matter if I'm ordering a giant TV or I'm ordering a package of balloons, it's going to pretty much be the same experience. I've gotten used to that. If you make me go through more hoops to order chicken or to order fish or to order a burrito than it takes me on Amazon, then that's friction and I'm not going to give you my market share. I'm going to go to somebody who does. So the playing field has forever changed because the expectations have changed. And that goes back to your very first question. What's the most important part of this? Understand your business through the eyes of the customer and the job you do, because it's no longer just as simple as, well, I got to drive through and I got to dine in. Isn't that going to be enough? Well, for some percentage of the population, it will be. A large percentage are forever changed.
Thank you so much, Mike. Out of the interest of time, we'll go ahead and progress it to that final slide and wrap things up. There were a handful of other questions that we didn't get to today, but thanks to everyone who's on the call today. Mike, special thanks to you for your time and insights. You've got so much great experience in this space, and I know I personally learned a lot, and I think all our attendees could say the same. For anyone who has follow-up questions for this, please feel free to email us at advisoryboard@revelsystems.com for follow-up, and my team will get back with you. We also got one question in the Q&A that was more technical in nature, and so we'll follow up with that directly. So with that, thank you all so much. Mike, did you have any final words you wanted to share?
I'd be remiss if I just didn't remind everybody that knows you, Sydney, take your favorite marketing person to lunch. But I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.